Gavel in this morning. Senators beginning with an hour of general speeches before continuing work on a bill extending certain provisions of the USA Patriot Act terrorism law that expire at the end of the day. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Shepherd of our souls, you enable us to lie down in green pastures as you restore our hopes. Let your love fill and rule our senators as they seek to serve you by serving this land we love. May they be willing to pray for one another with the awareness that they are wrapped in a blanket of mutuality and are the heirs of a common destiny. Lord, empower them to live such exemplary lives that people will see their good works and glorify your name. Relieve their necessities, lighten their burdens as they cheerfully submit to your gracious will. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 25, 2011. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair, and Daniel K. Millway, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for an hour, with the majority controlling the first half, Republicans controlling the final half. Following that morning business, we will resume consideration of the motion to concur in the House Message Company S-990, the legislative vehicle for the Patriot Act extension. I filed cloture on the motion to concur with respect to the Patriot Act extension last night. Under the rule, the cloture vote will occur 1 hour after we convene tomorrow. Additionally, we are working to reach an agreement to vote on the House Republican budget. We'll notify senators when an agreement is reached, and votes will be scheduled. Madam President, S-1057 is at the desk. It's due for a second reading.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S-1057, a bill to repeal the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit.
I would object, Madam President, to any further proceedings with regard to this bill at this time.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Madam President, for weeks, Americans old and young have been speaking out against the Republican plan to kill Medicare. It's not just Democrats. Republicans have been speaking out against it, too. Newt Gingrich called it a radical plan and, quote, right-wing social engineering, end of quote. Several Republican senators have similarly spoken out, calling what it really is, a plan that would shatter a cornerstone of our society and break our promise to the elderly and to the sick. Last night, though, the most important voices were heard. American voters had their first chance to do something about it. They went to the polls and resoundingly rejected that plan, and the candidate who ran on that plan's promised to dismantle Medicare. In a special congressional election in upstate New York, the Republican plan to kill Medicare was the #1 issue. It was the #2 issue. It was the #3 issue. It's what the voters most cared about and were most scared about, as well they should be. Here's what it would do. It would turn over seniors' health to profit-hungry insurance companies. It would let bureaucrats decide what tests and treatments seniors get. And it would ask seniors to pay more for the health care in exchange for fewer benefits. That's a bad deal all around. What's telling is not just that the voters rejected this plan, It's that the Republican candidate pushing the Republican plan to kill Medicare was rejected in a very Republican district. The district, which stretches from Buffalo to Rochester, has been in the Republican hands for 4 decades. It produced influential Republicans like Jack Kemp, who I served in Congress with. He served in the cabinet. He ran on the presidential ticket as a vice presidential candidate. Last night's special election was held to replace a Republican congressman who won that seat by a 3-to-1 margin. John McCain won the district in 2008. George W. Bush won the district 4 years earlier. Last year's Republican candidate for governor in New York lost in a landslide, but he won big in that district. That's how conservative it is. Democrats in Congress and even some candid Republicans know the Republican plan to kill Medicare is irresponsible and indefensible. Last night, voters showed the country and the Congress that they know it too. Should the chair announce morning business now?
Republican leader.
That's all right. No problem.
Republican leader.
Madam President, sometime today or tomorrow, Senate Democrats will have an opportunity to show what kind of future they believe in. They can vote for one of the Republican plans to get our nation's finances under control, each of which involves the kind of tough choices we'll need to make to bring down both deficits and debt. Or they can vote on the President's plan, which continues the unsustainable status quo, a vote to preserve our very way of life or throw it in jeopardy. It's interesting, when the President first announced his budget, most people panned it as tepid and irresponsible. The Washington Post summed it up pretty well by saying the President punted. Yet Senate Democrats embraced it. The senior senator from New York said the President's budget should have bipartisan support. The chairman of the Budget Committee gave the President, quote, good grades for a beginning. Other Democratic senators called the President's budget a step in the right direction, an important step forward, a good start, and a credible blueprint. One even described it, quote, wise. That was then. How about today? Well, if we're to believe the news reports, every single Democrat in the Senate now plans to vote against the President's budget. They don't even want to use it as a starting point. Why? We got the answer earlier this week from Senator Schumer when he indicated that Democrats now believe avoiding this debate altogether helps them in the next election. In other words, they think it's better not to keep track of our nation's finances at all than to support any plan that does. So much so that they're about to reject a budget that even they embraced a few months ago. They'll vote against every budget that comes to the floor, including the President's. 6 weeks after the Democratic co-chairman of the President's own debt commission told us that our nation's deficits and debt are like a cancer that threatens to destroy America from within, Democrats are ready to call it a work period without supporting any of the proposals that have been made, without producing anything of their own. Nothing. That's their answer to this crisis. Their focus is on an election that's still almost 2 years away. Well, I think that's a mistake. At a moment when our debts and deficits threaten the very future of our nation, Democrats have no excuse for proposing no vision whatsoever of their own. There's simply no defense for that. Washington is currently on pace to spend about $1.6 trillion more than it takes in this year alone, 3 times the biggest deficit we ever had before President Obama took office. Members of the President's own cabinet admitted last week that Medicare is in need of urgent reform if we want to preserve it for future generations. Congressman Ryan has shown courage by proposing a budget that would tackle these problems. Democrats are showing none by ignoring our problems altogether. This is the contrast Americans will see in the Senate this week. More than 2 years have passed since Democrats have produced a budget of their own. This is a complete and total abdication of their responsibilities, and there's no excuse for it. We have an obligation to the American people to come up with a plan. Democrats are officially abdicating that responsibility this week.
President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half hour and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Madam President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, what is the order we have?
We're in morning business.
Thank you.
And the senator is authorized to speak for up to 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, in the course of our lives, one of the most difficult moments anyone faces is to say goodbye to a parent. No matter how old we are or how old those parents are or how long they may have struggled with illness or infirmity, when people lose a mother or father, they are all always reminded of how much we are just children to our parents. That is the transition and experience that the O'Brien family of Marshfield, Massachusetts, was just this past month lost their patriarch, Edward Lawrence O'Brien, are feeling now. And experiencing. Edward O'Brien was an extraordinary blessing to his family and his friends, but also to the country he loved when he served in the United States Navy during World War II. And his passing is a great loss to everybody. Madam President, Ed O'Brien leaves behind his loving wife, Marge, his brother Gene, 6 devoted children, and 17 adoring grandchildren. And his son, Drew, has served the people of Massachusetts as my state director for almost a decade, living the spirit of public service that his father instilled in him and inspired in all of his family. Ed was, to borrow a terrific phrase from former Speaker Tip O'Neill, who reserved this for special people that he liked so much, he said, "Oh, so-and-so is a beautiful person." And he said it with that special twang. That was Ed O'Brien. He was a beautiful person. And I enjoyed meeting him on several occasions. Our last meeting will really be with me forever because I had the privilege of presenting him with his World War II medals for his service in the Pacific. He was so content, and he had such a great smile on his face, a twinkle in his eye, which he never deserted, which never left him as he battled bravely and accepted the illness that would take him from his family after 86 years, extraordinarily well lived. Ed O'Brien served proudly in the United States Navy during World War II, including the invasion of Okinawa. He embodied what we now know as the greatest generation of Americans who defended America and saved democracy for the world. He earned numerous decorations, including the Combat Action Ribbon, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with a Silver Star and a Bronze Star, and the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal. And he was a patriot who stood by his country and his family with equal measures of devotion. Indeed, the Mass, lovingly put together by his family, told the story of a man who loved his friends, loved his family, and loved his God. The God who, in the words of the old Irish hymn he enjoyed so, was his vision, his battle shield, his sword for the fight, his dignity, and his delight. In his eulogy for his father, Drew O'Brien offered unbelievable comfort to all who mourned with him, especially Ed and Marge's 17 grandchildren. He said to them, "For the rest of your life, carry him with you in your heart. Never forget the love he offered, the lessons he taught, the stories he told, or the fun that you had with him." Drew's eulogy was really a wonderful tribute to a father's legacy and a son's enduring love. And today, I would like to share it with colleagues in the United States Senate by having it included in the congressional record. And with that request, on behalf of our entire office and all those who know and love Drew, again extend our deepest sympathies and condolences to the entire O'Brien family. And to Drew personally, I'd say that having lost my own father now 11 years ago this summer, while the hurt never goes away, with the passage of time, you remember the good moments and the best lessons more and more. The memories sustain you going forward. And because Drew is such a gift to all of us, I want to thank Ed and Margaret, his dearest Margie, for the extraordinary family they created, nurtured, and loved. And to Ed O'Brien, the great Navy man, now at rest, bid him fair winds and following seas. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
Senator from New Mexico.
I would ask consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I know that Senator Blumenthal is coming to speak, and Senator Kerry ended a little bit early, so I just want to get up for a couple of minutes, and when Senator Blumenthal comes in, I'll obviously yield to him because I know he has some time reserved here. I wanted to get up and talk this morning just a little bit about the procedure and what we've gone through in terms of the Patriot Act. And I'm very discouraged to see the path that we're headed down in terms of the Patriot Act. And I was here in the Congress, as the presiding officer knows, when we voted almost 10 years ago on the Patriot Act. It was a sad occasion then because it was right after 9/11, and this horrible thing had happened to our country. But we rushed in a very, very big way to move forward with a piece of legislation. It was the so-called Patriot Act, and that act ended up being something that I think many of us many of us regret. And I just want to read a short passage from the Washington Post at the time, which I think showed the haste in which we acted and where we infringed on our constitutional rights. And I think the Post really says it all. The Washington Post noted, quote, "Members of both parties complained they had no idea what they were voting on, were fearful that aspects of the bill went too far, yet voted for it anyway," end quote. And I can tell you at the time, that's the way it was. We were on the floor. We had to vote. Nobody knew what was in the bill. I remember one congressman waving a copy of the bill saying there's only one copy on the floor, and it's hot. It's hot off the Xerox machine. So it's very unfortunate that we moved so quickly in so much haste. 10 years later, almost 10 years later, we haven't had the debate that we need to have on this piece of legislation. The greatest deliberative body has not weighed in with amendments. We have not moved forward in a serious way to try and tackle this piece of legislation that's so important to our country, important to our freedom, important to our liberty. And what are the problems that we should be dealing with? Just very quickly, and I know my colleague Senator Blumenthal is here, and I'm going to quickly move off this and put my full statement in the record. But two things have happened that indicate we have some serious problems with the Patriot Act. Number one, in March of 2007, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice in a report concluded that and this is a quote from that report, quote, concluded that the FBI engaged in serious misuse of national security letter authority. And the report also said, quote, in many instances the FBI misuse of national security letters violated NSL statutes, Attorney General guidelines, or the FBI's own internal policies, end quote. So there we have an Inspector General telling us that the executive branch with the piece of legislation has moved way beyond where they should. That's something we should take a hard look at, and I have an amendment, and I know other senators have an amendment on that. There have also been courts which have looked at parts of the Patriot Act and found that act to be unconstitutional. It's only incumbent upon us when you have a ruling like that to take a look at it, to offer amendments to try to make changes. I really hearken back to what I remember reflecting on in that day when we passed the act. Benjamin Franklin saying, and he was talking about our precious freedom and our precious liberty, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the line, those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. And so that's where we are today. Madam Chair, I would move consent to put my full statement in the record as read, and at this point, knowing Senator Blumenthal's here, I will yield the floor.
Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask for permission to extend my remarks to 15 minutes if necessary, if there is no objection.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we all have a shared commitment to our nation's veterans. That shared commitment is reflected in many of the programs that are supported by yourself and my colleagues in this body. Every year, I deeply respect the knowledge and dedication that my fellow senators have brought to this critical issue. Each of my colleagues, almost without exception, has supported measures that have helped our veterans over the years. And I rise today to introduce my first piece of legislation, a bill to help our nation's veterans. Our nation must keep faith with the men and women who have served and sacrificed for our nation. Unfortunately and unconscionably, America is still failing them and their families by tolerating unemployment, homelessness, inadequate health care. We must renew our commitment to more than 250,000 veterans in the state of Connecticut and 22 million across the country to ensure that no veteran is left behind. Our commitment to veterans must be unwavering. Despite our best intentions, we fail all too often to accord our veterans the support they have earned. Unfortunately, according to the Department of Veterans Affairs, more than 76,000 veterans are homeless on any given night, and twice that number will be homeless at some point during the year. The unemployment rate among veterans has doubled over the past 3 years. 27% of veterans in their early 20s are unemployed. That number is almost twice the unemployment rate of their peers who have not served in the military. The Bureau of Labor Statistics recently reported that unemployment for veterans who served in their country after September 2001 is 11.5%. Again, a figure far higher than the national unemployment rate. 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans are estimated to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. When veterans return home, they must wait at least half a year on average for their claims decisions to be decided by the Department of Veterans Affairs before they can receive benefits. Those numbers are simply unacceptable. As I speak today, America's longest war continues, and less than 1% of the nation is in uniform. Never in the history of the country have so few fought for so long at such great personal cost and sacrifice. Under the leadership of Secretary Shinseki, the Department of Veterans Affairs has taken strong and welcome steps toward the goal of building a 21st century system that supports caregivers of serious injured Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, improving services to women's veterans, expanding the availability of health care, and preventing veteran homelessness. But the gaps in the system remain, and they are debilitating and destructive, really devastating to many veterans. We can do better, and we must do more. So the legislation I introduced today is entitled Honoring All Veterans Act of 2011. Its 16 comprehensive provisions are only a first phase. This legislative proposal is a comprehensive package, but only an opening salvo in a sustained, unceasing campaign to ensure that no veteran is left behind. It's a down payment on a larger debt. The goal is to give all veterans the homecoming and the services they need and deserve. Our military men and women have kept their promise to serve and sacrifice for this country, and we must now keep faith with them. America's commitment to our veterans should reflect the depth of their sacrifice. This measure is entitled Honoring All Veterans Act because all veterans are brave servicemen and women serving today in places that we can barely pronounce the names of, are deployed around the globe, and they deserve to be honored in defending our freedom and democracy. And we must honor that service, not only in words, but in deeds. This legislation comes from veterans and their families themselves, veterans and families whom I have met, seeing and hearing their struggles and dreams, their achievements and defeats, as I've worked for them during my 20 years as Attorney General and 4+ months as a United States Senator. In the VFW halls and American Legion halls, in living rooms and school auditoriums, in countless gatherings across the state of Connecticut, I've been privileged to listen and learn from veterans and their families who have shared their personal stories and insights. So this legislation simply continues the work that I've done as Attorney General. I'm proud of that work, and proud, most importantly, of my partnership with veterans in Connecticut in proposing this legislation. My goal then, and it has been continuously, to keep faith with our veterans, to honor our promises to them. This Honoring All Veterans Act of 2011 will address 4 key areas. First, expanding job opportunities for veterans. Second, assisting homeless veterans. Third, improving veterans' health care with a special emphasis on mental health services. Modernizing, fourth, the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I ask unanimous consent, Madam President, for a summary of this legislation, a full summary to be inserted in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. First, on expanding job opportunities. To honor all veterans and give them the welcome home that they have earned, we need to focus first on jobs. Like all Americans, veterans are striving to provide for their families and participate in the economic recovery to find jobs in our slowly recovering economy. Good jobs require education and training, as well as independent living services for veterans. Our nation has done much to address this issue, such as the expanded post-9/11 GI Bill, but gaps in the system remain. They are all too glaring. My legislation will expand job opportunities in 5 significant ways. First, the legislation raises the statutory cap for the Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Independent Living Program to welcome hundreds of additional veterans. This vital program helps veterans with severe service-connected disabilities, enabling them to live independently. It helps veterans with those kinds of disabilities participate in family and community life and increases their potential to return to work. Second, the legislation authorizes veterans to reuse the Department of Defense Transition Assistance Program, known as TAP, and meet with counselors at any military installation for up to 1 year after their separation. This program was developed to assist military personnel leaving the service with information about jobs, education, career development, and veterans returning to Connecticut wishing to participate again in the Transition Assistance Program should have that opportunity, in effect, to participate for a second time, maybe even a third time. Third, the legislation authorizes a study of how best to ensure that civilian employers and educational institutions recognize veterans' military training. The military recruits the most talented men and women in America to serve, and then it invests heavily in their professional development. And yet when they trade their uniforms in for civilian clothes, employers and others, such as professional accrediting organizations, often refuse to recognize or understand how to make use of their military experience and the expertise they've gained at the expense of taxpayers. The Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America reported that, and I'm quoting, 61% of employers do not believe they have a complete understanding of the qualifications of ex-service members. And recently service members with college degrees earn on average almost $10,000 less per year than their non-veteran counterparts. One way to close this gap is to have the Department of Defense review the list of military occupational specialties, such as the 22 MOSs in Army engineering or 16 MOSs in Army communications, and ensure that completing MOS qualifications will provide those service members with credentials recognized by civilian employers. The study authorized in this legislation will start that process, and I am committed to working in the Senate to see this problem resolved. Fourth, the legislation reauthorizes the Veterans Education Outreach Program to provide money for campus-based outreach services to veterans. This program was first established in 1972 to provide colleges with a significant number of veterans on campus with additional resources to make sure that those students get the most out of their educational experience and use VA benefits available to assist them. And fifth, the legislation authorizes a comprehensive program at the Department of Labor to assist veterans with TBI or PTSD in the workplace. It provides technical assistance to employers of veterans living with those conditions and provides best practices relating to help those employees develop successful strategies for on-the-job success. This legislation also reaches veterans in a variety of other key areas. Recently, a female veteran visited my office. She and her 2 children were homeless and needed help. In their case, we could find temporary shelter. But on the issue of homelessness, many veterans do not know where to turn or are hesitant to do so. This proposal, the Honoring Veterans Act, will provide aid for homeless projects, for other services to aid in stopping and reducing homelessness. On improving veterans' health care and mental health services. As I've traveled Connecticut meeting with veterans, I've seen firsthand how veterans with traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress face unique challenges in accessing the Department of Veterans Affairs for benefits and medical assistance. Veterans deserve the best possible medical care, particularly when it comes to treating TBI or post-traumatic stress. These are the signature wounds of the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. More than a quarter of these injuries are undiagnosed, according to the military itself. And then too often, even if they're diagnosed, service members are screened but do not receive a full course of treatment. To address this issue, my legislation requires the Department of Defense to identify and then close the gap between screenings and treatment. Simply diagnosing a soldier or a Marine with symptoms of PTS or TBI does not heal them. This legislation also addresses the problem of finding qualified psychiatrists, psychologists, nursing professionals to work in VA medical hospitals and outpatient clinics by accessing graduates from the Uniformed Services University of the Department of the Health Services Department, and it goes on to provide other means of dealing with this issue. Modernizing the Department of Veterans Affairs is the final section of this legislation. It addresses the DoD and VA transition process through improved monitoring and oversight. It increases pension benefits and gives veterans grounds for appeal at the Board of Veterans' Appeals if the VA has misplaced or misfiled their documents. I hear about this problem, as my colleagues do, again and again and again as I listen to veterans. Recently, a veteran visited my office. He's been waiting on a hearing date with the Board of Veterans' Appeals for over a year. His story is typical. This legislation provides one much-needed improvement to the Board of Veterans' Appeals, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to address other much-needed improvements. We can honor our veterans whose claims are stuck in the Board of Veterans' Appeals by confirming judges to the court that reviews them. 3 of those 9 seats are now vacant, and each judge must preside over 600 cases per year, far more than any other federal appellate courts. Finally, in closing, let me acknowledge the many veterans throughout the state of Connecticut who helped me to draft and craft this measure. I'd like to thank Commander Richard DeFrederico of the BFW and Commander Daniel Thurston of the American Legion for their very dedicated work, not only in assisting me, but day in and day out on behalf of veterans. I'd like to thank Bob Janicki, who has spent recent years after serving this country in the United States Marine Corps during the Vietnam era in providing help to homeless veterans and veterans seeking jobs. Paul Bud Buca is a veteran and friend with the most distinguished service record possible in winning Medal of Honor. And his life after military service, giving back to other veterans and managing several successful companies, has been an example of how veterans continue to provide leadership with courage and vision. Master Sergeant Frank Alvarado has made a number of very helpful suggestions, including, for example, reauthorizing the Veterans Education Outreach Program. And I'd like to acknowledge my very deep respect for our Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Linda Schwartz, who has been a tireless advocate for all veterans. Connecticut is blessed to have the leadership of veterans who help each other, care for each other, look out for each other. And I look forward to working with them in assuring that this legislation is passed. I have no illusions that accomplishing passage of these kinds of measures will be easy, but I hope for support across the aisle. This kind of goal certainly ought to unite us, not divide us. We have so much more in common on this issue than in conflict. And I am hoping that we can work together to assure that we keep faith with our veterans, that we honor their service, assure that we welcome them home with the kind of services they need and deserve so that no veteran will be left behind. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, last week I came to the floor to talk about the crushing burden of debt that will soon be coming our way because of government spending, mainly driven by entitlement programs. And I noted that our unfunded liabilities in Medicare and Social Security are over $40 trillion. And in fact, last week, I should say, we got the reports from the Medicare and Social Security trustees, and which noted that Medicare is already running a cash deficit of about $46 billion, Social Security running a cash deficit of about $32 billion. And for those who think that we don't need to do anything because these so-called trust funds are not going to be in trouble until some point into the future, I think the important point to remember is that the trust funds and the IOUs that are in the trust funds are not an economic asset that can pay cash benefits. And so at some point that's either going to have to be a massive tax increase, a huge reduction in benefits, or an incredible amount of additional borrowing. So, you know, what we project will happen with Social Security at some point into the future is that there will be about a 20 to 25% reduction in benefits when we hit that wall, which suggests that we ought to be taking steps right now to avoid that. And I think the important point, when you start seeing cash deficits where the payroll taxes that are coming in no longer exceed the amount of benefits that are paying out, but rather you're running deficits, that also adds to the overall deficit that we're dealing with as a country. And so we don't have the luxury of time. We can't afford to wait. This is an issue that is upon us now. Social Security and Medicare reform are issues that need to be undertaken. And if we don't do that, as I mentioned last week as well, Madam President, you will see enormous increases in the amount of debt, the amount of deficits as a percentage of our GDP. In fact, in the year 2035, if we don't change our ways, the amount of government spending, and this is under current projections, which I believe are going to be very conservative, and probably these numbers could be much, much worse, but would comprise 35.2% of GDP. Government spending comprised 35.2% of GDP, which is 60% higher than the historical average. The historical average of what we spend on the federal government as a percentage of our entire economic output for the last 40 years has been 20.6%. This year it is over 24%, and if we stay on this current trajectory, as I said, in the year 2035, based upon what I believe are very conservative assumptions, and this could be much worse than that, but we would be looking at 35%, over 35% of our entire economy spent just on the federal government. And as I said, that's 60% higher than the historical average. In the same year, deficits would be about 16% of GDP, and debt to GDP would be 185%. And so we would actually have a cumulative debt that was almost twice the size of our entire economic output, our entire GDP for that year. So these are more than just numbers for economists to look at. These have real impacts in real time. They affect people across the country today. And I wanted to point out again, as I have mentioned in the past, the study done by economists Reinhardt and Rogoff, which took a good look at countries, and particularly developed countries that have acquired or accumulated the sort of debt level that we're looking at in this country, and what that impact that has had on their economies. And in their analysis and their study, they came to the conclusion that when you reach a certain level of debt to GDP, in this case 90% debt to GDP, that you lose 1 percentage point of economic growth. In other words, economic growth would be 1 percentage point less than it otherwise would be, simply because of that high debt to GDP level that the country is sustaining. And they said that's at 90%. Well, if you look at where we are today, debt to GDP, we're at about 93, 94%. And according to the White House's own economists, every time that you lose a percentage point of economic growth, it costs you about 1 million jobs. So having the kinds of debt levels that we are carrying today creates a cloud over our economy, reduces economic growth, and reduces jobs. It's costing us job creation in our economy, which is the thing that most of us, I think, believe that we should be focused on. If we're going to focus on jobs, it is also, I think we have to say there is a correlation between spending, debt, and jobs. And I think that the sooner that we acknowledge that, the quicker we move to address that, the better off we're all going to be, and the sooner we're going to see the economy start to recover and expand and create jobs again. So that's the impact that is happening now. It only gets worse if changes aren't made. When the government borrows money, obviously, there is an impact in the private economy. There's less money for private companies and individuals to invest in equipment, plants, housing, and training. It crowds out these investments and instead allocates money, spends money on less efficient, less necessary, duplicative, and oftentimes downright wasteful programs and projects. If we don't get our arms around this level of spending and debt, it also means higher interest rates for individuals who want to borrow to buy a home. And it's clear that individuals and businesses across the country, even if it isn't clear to everyone here in Congress, that the government cannot continue to spend ever-increasing amounts of money without raising taxes. And that creates uncertainty among individuals and businesses across this country and acts as a disincentive for them to invest. So you've got uncertainty about what the impact of all this spending and debt and what it's going to have on future taxes. And so a lot of capital continues to sit on the sidelines, not being deployed, not being put to work, simply because there is this uncertainty about what's going to happen and whether or not Washington is serious about getting this spending and debt issue under control and focusing on the fiscal problems that we have as a nation. I mentioned last week that Social Security benefits would automatically be cut by over 20% if that program is not reformed. Now, this is not the result of the House-passed budget, contrary to what many are saying. This is the result of the current situation that we face today with Social Security. Likewise, according to the Medicare's actuaries' alternative scenario, the health care bill that was passed last year would lead to significant numbers of providers becoming unprofitable and would presumably stop providing services if health care costs are not contained. And this, Madam President, assumes that we don't have a debt crisis. Now, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, said recently that the odds of a debt crisis happening in the next 2 to 3 years is about 50%. So if you take that analysis, you take what Standard & Poor's has now said about the American credit rating, they have warned of a possible downgrade in the U.S. credit rating in the next 2 to 3 years if serious changes aren't made. And I think you can see why there is such a cloud hanging over our economy right now. Now, some believe that this debt crisis may not occur for a few years down the road. One thing we know is that it is coming. It is predictable. We don't know exactly when, but we know that it's coming because you cannot continue to have these types of signals, this kind of not only anecdotal information but hard data describing the current state of our economy, the current state of federal spending, the amount of debt to GDP that we are continuing to increase year over year, and not believe that you're not going to have some significant and measurable impacts on our economy. And that's why it is so important, Madam President, that we take the steps that are necessary to avert this crisis. If we don't, we know what's going to happen. As our debt burden increases, investors from around the world are going to increasingly demand higher yields to lend us money. That will further exacerbate our deficits, and interest alone will consume increasing amounts of our revenue until we can no longer pay our bills. We've seen this happen in countries around the world, and we know the magnitude of the actions that these governments have had to take in response to these crises in other places around the world. Greece, for example, was forced to take loans out from the International Monetary Fund and has had to impose a variety of austerity measures. These austerity measures include laying off public sector employees, cutting their pay, freezing their pay for many years at a time, including a 2% increase in their VAT tax. They have a value-added tax in that country, and a 10% increase in other taxes. Dramatic cuts to pension programs and reforms to entitlement programs as well. And they are still paying all that, Madam President, they are still paying very high interest rates. The yield on two-year debt is over 24% in Greece. In Ireland, they had to implement austerity measures of more than 9% of GDP, 9% of their entire economy. That's the equivalent in the United States, if you were to translate that into the impact that it would have on our economy. That is the impact in the United States of raising taxes and cutting spending by $1.3 trillion in 1 year, an astounding amount. But this wasn't enough. After they looked to implement another austerity plan of tax increases and spending cuts, that one was estimated to cost the average family in Ireland $5,800 a year. Those are the types of measures that have been forced upon, imposed upon some of these other countries in the world because they have seen the debt crisis that we're trying to avoid in this country. And at the same time that they've taken all these austerity measures, they've seen massive contractions in their economy, because we all know that what happens when you start raising taxes and you create the amount of economic uncertainty that I've described earlier, it becomes very, very difficult for small businesses to invest and to create jobs. So not surprisingly, you've seen these austerity measures leading to violence, protests, and general discontent, and it appears now that Greece is seriously considering at least a technical default on some of their debts. And so that's, I guess, a picture of what our future will look like, absent changes, Madam President. We have a shrinking economy, fewer government services, and dramatically higher taxes. That's what the experience has been in some of these countries that I just mentioned. That is what we are headed toward, absent serious, meaningful action in getting our spending and debt and our entitlement programs under control. There is no reason to go down this path. The Senate is going to have the opportunity over the course of the next few months, I hope at least, to vote on legislation that would start to address not only the near-term issues of discretionary spending and capping that and capping it into the future, in the near term and the midterm, but also to address the issue of entitlement reform, which, as I mentioned earlier, you cannot solve the debt problems, the fiscal problems, and the crisis without taking on the issue of entitlement programs. If we don't, Greece and Ireland are what our future will look like, Madam President. And today we will vote, or today or tomorrow, I'm not sure exactly when, on a series of budget proposals which are, in each and every case, I think, somebody's attempt to try and address this issue. We have seen the House of Representatives act on a budget earlier this year, so the so-called Ryan budget. They passed that. We're going to get a chance to vote on that here in the Senate. We've got a couple of our colleagues on the Republican side who've come up with their own ideas about budgets and what we might do to address this fiscal crisis. And we're going to vote on the proposal the President put forward, which is completely inadequate to the challenge. In fact, increases spending over 10 years, dramatically increases debt, and dramatically increases taxes, which would have an incredibly detrimental impact on the economy. That's what the President had put forward. We're going to vote on that today as well. Now, having said that, Madam President, all these votes, although they are, I suppose you could argue, important in some respects, are going to end up being more symbolic votes, because I don't think any of them are going to get the necessary votes here in the Senate to pass. The ironic thing about the debate on budgets this week is the only budget that we are not voting on is the Senate budget. We don't have a budget now for 756 days in the United States Senate. This government spends $3.8 trillion a year. It has been 756 days now since the Senate has passed a budget. And so we've got a couple of our Republican colleagues who are putting forward alternatives. We've got the House that's put forward an alternative. But the Democrat majority here in the Senate has not, for 756 days, moved to bring a budget to the floor of the United States Senate so that we can have a debate and vote upon the priorities, the fiscal priorities for this country, and how we are going to spend $3.8 trillion of the American people's tax money. That is a stunning, stunning development. Now, I'm on the Budget Committee in the Senate. We have yet to even have a markup. I don't anticipate probably that we will in the near future. But having said that, we cannot afford to wait to take on this nation's fiscal challenges. Now, I hope that absent action on a budget here in the Senate, that these discussions that are occurring right now between the Vice President and the Senate leaders will yield a result that will enable us at least to move forward and address these fiscal issues. But it doesn't negate the responsibility, Madam President, that we as United States Senators have to put forward a budget and to debate that budget. And ironically, we're going to vote on the House of Representatives' passed budget. I don't know this for a fact. I've heard this is the case, that this will be the first time ever that the United States Senate will vote on the budget passed by the other body, in particular by the other body when it's controlled by the other political party. First time in history. Now, I think the leader, the Democratic leader, wants to do that to make some political point, but I think we all know that us not passing a budget, or at least debating a budget here in the United States Senate, is a complete abdication of the responsibility that we have as United States Senators to be good fiscal stewards of the American tax dollars. So I would just close again today, Madam President, by saying that we've seen our future. You can look at what's happening in Greece, you can look at what's happening in Ireland, you can look at the type of austerity measures that have been imposed by outside entities who have said, you make these changes or you're not going to continue to get IMF funding, for example. And even after all that, you're still looking at these interest rates in the 20% range. You're looking at economies that continue to contract rather than expand and grow. We need to create the conditions here that will enable our economy to grow and to create jobs, and it starts with getting federal spending and debt under control. Now, one final point I'll make, Madam President, this has to do with an issue that pertains to my state of South Dakota, and I think it ties into the broader point that I'm making about the economic uncertainty that's being created out there today for businesses. There was a piece of legislation that passed a little over a year here, the Credit Card Act, which put in statute a number of changes with regard to subprime credit card companies. All fine and good. I voted against it. We have companies in South Dakota who play by the rules. They have abided by the laws. They're a heavily regulated industry, and yet Congress decided, over my objections, to move forward with legislation that would change the rules by which they play. Well, that was all fine and good, but when it came time to implement those regulations, the Federal Reserve decided that the statutory framework that was created wasn't quite good enough. And so the initial regulations that were out there, this company reacted to those, tried to adapt its business model, and, well, the Fed decided that wasn't good enough, and so they took in regulation steps that went beyond what the statute had called for and made it even more difficult. We predicted at the time, we said this is going to cost jobs in our state of South Dakota. Well, just this last week, that particular company announced that they are closing their operation in Spearfish, South Dakota. That will impact 330 jobs in a town of about 10,000 people. Incidentally, the mayor of that city worked for this company, and there's a story here from the Rapid City Journal which describes the economic impact of these job losses, what it will mean to that community, what it will mean to the entire area. And I can't help but thinking, another example of regulatory overreach, of regulatory agencies deciding that they know best and going above and beyond even what this Congress had called for in terms of the legislative requirements, the legislative intent, and taking regulations beyond that. And so you've got real-world impacts on people out there as a result of decisions that are made here in Washington, D.C. And when we tried to make these arguments to the regulators, they couldn't have been less concerned about jobs. We said this is going to cost us jobs. This is the beginning, by the way. There is another location in Huron, South Dakota. There's one in Dakota Dunes, South Dakota. There's one in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I think this is the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to see in terms of the job losses caused by regulatory overreach because a federal agency decided they knew best and went above and beyond even what the United States Congress had said with regard to this particular issue. So, Madam President, these are, again, real-life examples of decisions made here in Washington, D.C. and the impacts that they have in the real world. I hope that we can put policies in place here that will enable and encourage economic growth and job creation, not hinder it and inhibit it. And with that, job creation, not hinder it and inhibit it. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Madam President, I rise today to talk about an issue that I have found the debate to be very fascinating about, and that is the proposed Medicare reform. I find the debate so fascinating because it's proceeding as if there had been no changes to Medicare recently. Anyone telling you that there have been no changes just isn't being straightforward. Sweeping changes to our Medicare system, they were debated, they were passed in the most partisan way possible, only Democrats voted for them, and they were signed into law by President Obama. The President's new law already puts this fundamental health care program in significant jeopardy. Now, some may come down to the floor or some may rise up and say, well, Mike, you're all wrong about this. They'll want you to believe that the $500 billion in cuts to Medicare in the new health care law will actually extend the Medicare program. But in reality, the health care law isn't giving new life to this program at all. The Congressional Budget Office reports that Medicare will be insolvent in 2020, just 9 years from now. Yes, that's right. Complete insolvency in 9 years. That's the current plan voted on and signed into law by the President. And that analysis doesn't even account for the $500 billion cuts that were taken out of Medicare to fund the health care law. Now, don't believe me. We've consulted the experts. The experts say that the health care law counts or attempts to count the same dollar twice. The Medicare actuary says these cuts, and I'm quoting here, cannot be simultaneously used to finance other federal outlays, such as the coverage expansions under the health care law and to extend the trust fund, unquote. This can only mean either the new health care law doesn't have enough funding to the tune of $500 billion, or in the alternative, Medicare is in more serious jeopardy than even the trustees' report points out, in jeopardy of becoming insolvent much sooner than the experts predict. So, I stand here today and I tell you, if you are 56 years old or younger, and you're thinking about the day when you apply for your Medicare benefits, well, the experts say, the trustee says, sorry, you're out of luck. Under the current law of the land, that's the case. The President's health care reform, which again I point out was passed on the most partisan of partisan votes, did not get a single Republican vote. And every Medicare beneficiary will be impacted by the cuts of this program. So if you're out there and saying, well, Mike, I want to protect the poor, all I can tell you is the President's plan does not do that. If you're saying, but Mike, I want to protect the middle class, all I can tell you is that the President's plan doesn't do that. And what do we get out of that? According to the trustees, complete insolvency in 9 years. You see, the President's reform is founded upon the unrealistic assumption that doctors will continue providing the same services to patients with a 30% cut in a Medicare program that's not covering their costs today. I just had doctors in my office saying, Mike, we can't continue to provide Medicare services if that cut occurs. And yet, that is the current law of the land. By comparison, one of the plans we may vote on this week protects Medicare beneficiaries over 55 by just saying, look, we are going to hold you harmless. Your benefits will not be changed at all. The plan says, let's fix this physician payment formula so they don't have the 30% cut, so access for Medicare patients can continue. The plan says, let's protect those who are especially deserving of our support, those who are below 150% of the poverty level and truly can't afford the health care they need. Now, you're probably saying, but Mike, what plan is that? The plan I'm talking about is Paul Ryan's plan. Now, you tell me which sounds more severe in its approach. A plan that puts government bureaucrats in charge of controlling health care costs, robs Medicare of any potential savings to start a new entitlement, and at the end of this, in 9 years, brings bankruptcy to Medicare. Or a plan that empowers patients to choose their own unique plan, ensures Medicare savings are reinvested back into the Medicare program, and preserves Medicare by bringing costs back to sustainable levels, which is the Ryan plan. I want to be clear about the fact that there are some things about this plan I would love to debate and change. For example, perhaps we could devise an incremental transition within the Medicare proposal. Maybe we need to evaluate if the medical savings accounts for those most in need should be indexed to something better than the general inflation rate. Maybe those below a severe poverty line should be exempted entirely. Perhaps some of the tax reform, including elimination of certain tax deductions, needs to be eliminated. We will have the opportunity to debate and make improvements, but only if we vote to proceed to the bill. But you know what? Arms are going to be broken all over the place here this week to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because this isn't a serious attempt to try to fix the problem. This is all about messaging for campaigns and political consequences. The reality is no plan's going to get enough votes. And I'll stand here and I'll observe those arms getting broken. We'll need orthopedic surgeons on the Senate floor to fix them. Sadly, passage was never the intention here. These plans were scheduled for votes purely for the sake of messaging on an important program that provides health care for seniors that by the trustees' own definition will be insolvent in 9 short years. These votes aren't designed to fix this problem. These votes, I guarantee, are all about political fodder for next year's election season. Well, I just believe this isn't what we were elected to do on the Senate floor. These antics are what rightfully embolden those who say Congress is incapable of solving these very, very hard problems. As the senator from South Dakota indicated, today we mark 756 days since the Senate passed a budget. As a former governor, I can't imagine going to the people of the great state of Nebraska and saying, you know, I've been thinking about it, we won't be doing a budget this year. I'd be looking for a new state to live in. Well, 756 days in this week We're not even making a serious attempt to deal with it. With a deficit exceeding $14 trillion, our nation needs something greater than political symbolic votes, which we all know will fail. Maybe, just maybe, we can muster the courage to take seriously our responsibility to seniors and to all Americans. Madam President, thank you. I yield the floor.
President.